62 years ago today, the world watched hope turn to horror in a single motorcade.
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Tonight, we revisit the JFK assassination with fresh eyes,
And I remember exactly where I was.
real evidence,
A magic bullet would have been one that somehow missed the governor.
and voices who lived the moment.
Armageddon was right around the corner.
What happened in Dallas? And why are we still debating it 6 decades later? So, Rich, we got a crazy episode today. It's an anniversary episode, the 62nd anniversary episode of the assassination of JFK.
It is 62 years ago today. I remember where I was exactly when I was told, and I can't get that out of my mind. It's there, and every time I think about that on this anniversary, it brings me back to where I was and what I was doing back 62 years ago today.
So we're gonna break all that down, but before we break this whole case down, I want to introduce our guest, Eric Ulis. Many of you guys know Eric from the D.B. Cooper case, and currently he's really diving deep into the Gardner case. Eric, I want to thank you for taking the time to come up here, and it's good to see you on this side of the country.
Yeah.
Opposed to out in Vancouver.
It's my pleasure being here. It's a lot of fun, actually, to come out here and talk about this case. Obviously, it's a very, very big deal, the anniversary, 62nd anniversary. And while I think a lot of the questions with respect to the JFK assassination, what actually happened, have been answered, there are a few out there, a few critical ones that haven't been answered. But
Sure.
having said all that, it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the conversation today.
So with this particular case, there's so many different types of conspiracy theories, and everyone is always like, did the Warren Commission do it right? Did they miss stuff? Did they intentionally miss stuff? Both of you, what is your initial thoughts on this whole thing? Because, it truly is crazy. I'll start with Rich.
Well, my thoughts don't go back to the assassination as much as it does the era of that particular time. Only a year before was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the country had this paranoia that Armageddon was right around the corner. I got married during the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was in the end of October, beginning of November of 1962. And John F. Kennedy was important, especially to people in Massachusetts, because he was from here. We considered him to be one of us because he represented us in Congress. And what went on during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we were nose to nose, or he was nose to nose with Nikita Khrushchev, and there were missiles in Cuba and nuclear missiles in Cuba and Russians in Cuba that manned those missile sites. And when they shot down one of our spy planes that were seeing what was going on, it brought up a level of intensity in the United States that still carried forward right up through the assassination time a year later. I do remember the day of the assassination. I remember exactly where I was. Somebody asked me not too long ago, did you vote for JFK? Well, I couldn't vote for JFK because I couldn't vote, because I had just turned 21 during the month of November of 63, and you couldn't vote until you were 21. In the United States. That changed in the 1970s when the 26th Amendment came up and allowed 18-year-olds and older to vote. And that was a result of the Vietnam War, and people were saying, well, you can send me to war when I'm 18, but you don't allow me to vote, and that's how that evolved. But the day of the assassination, it was a cloudy day like it is today, and I had to look that up recently to find out what the weather was. But I knew exactly what I was doing when I was told that he was shot. And that's how it was presented to me, that the president has been shot. Not that the president had passed, that the president had been shot. I was at my dad's garage. I was working on an old Remington electric typewriter. I was typing out somebody's bill. I can tell you exactly who it was and exactly what the work was. It was a driver's side window repair on somebody that lived down the street from my dad's garage. I don't know what kind of car it was, but I do remember it's burned right in there, and I can't remember that. And the weekend that followed after that was just a blur. And we can go into that if you'd like me to tell you, but
Yeah, I'm curious, Eric. What are your thoughts on this whole issue?
Well, first of all, I was not alive at the time the assassination occurred. I was born about 26 months later, February of '66. So yeah, I guess about 2 years and 2 months later is when I came along. But I'll say that it's interesting. I've had this conversation with my parents, and I don't know. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as well, Rich. I've always sort of felt sad that I didn't have the opportunity actually to be alive during that period of time and to witness it firsthand. Obviously, it was a horrific event for a number of reasons, but as a person who really enjoys history, as I do, it's tough to be relegated to only learning about this through other people's eyes and other people's words. I would rather have been alive during that period of time to have taken it in real time and experienced it in real time and have my own thoughts and impressions about it versus, again, being relegated to reading about it in the history books. Now, having said that, I have read quite a bit about it. I've spent a lot of time investigating the assassination in particular, as well as Kennedy as a person as a whole. And it's unfortunate because I really don't like dwelling too much on the assassination, because obviously that was just a very small part of the full picture. I would much rather talk about just Kennedy and his whole life and everything about the family and everything. But that said, I will say that I believe the Warren Commission basically got it right. I do not believe there was any conspiracy whatsoever. I don't believe there was a second shooter. I don't believe in the grassy knoll stuff. And I think that essentially you have a certifiable loser in the form of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was trying to basically leave his mark on the world. And obviously he was... his thought process was wanting, very sort of demented in a lot of ways. And he kind of just figured, hey, this is the way to leave his mark on the world. And unfortunately for history, the opportunity presented itself on November 22nd, 1963. And he was, I hate to use the word successful, but in terms of what his mission was, he was largely successful that day. So basically the nuts and bolts of it are, I believe that the Warren Commission basically got it right. I think there are a few things that are incorrect, which we can get into, but basically that's it.
Do you think that he was a Cuban agent, a double agent, going down to Mexico City and digging into all this other stuff that he supposedly did? Speaking with the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy, do you think that they really had a part to play in this, or?
I don't think that there's any evidence to indicate that whatsoever. On the other hand, the fact that he found himself down in Mexico and he was trying to work with the Cubans and trying to work with the Russians to, re-defect back to Russia after he had defected and then undefected, then try to re-defect. I mean, I think that just kind of is a peek inside of just the craziness of this guy's mind, the dementedness of this guy's mind. So to answer your question, no. And I think that the Soviets, especially after the president was assassinated, I mean, I think they were concerned, rightfully, that, they may be viewed as being involved in this in some manner, behind this in some manner. And I think that they went out of their way to basically say, hey, this wasn't, we had nothing to do with this. This is crazy man Lee Harvey Oswald, who unfortunately spent some time in the Soviet Union, and therefore there's the connection there. But no, I just think this was just one lone nut basically trying to leave his mark on the world. And there's a lot to the story that I think indicates as much.
Rich, what do you think?
Well, it's pretty evident from what we know now that the Soviet Union or Russia, when he defected through Finland, they were really skeptical of him. Number one, they thought he might have been planted there by the U.S. government. And as time went on, I think they came to the conclusion, as Eric has said, that this guy didn't have all his ducks in a row. He was, as you said, deranged, and I think they thought that. They kind of exiled him from view, sent him off to Minsk, got him a job in a TV factory. Next thing you know, he met someone over there, married, and was back here. And it was that whole episode of him leaving the military. And he had a checkered past in the military. He'd had a couple of offenses that he was brought up on charges. One was a firearms violation, and one was he got into a scuffle with a sergeant, and they brought him up on charges on that. So he had kind of a checkered existence while he was in the U.S. Marines. Yes, he was in Japan, and he was privy to some goings on that may have involved U-2 flights, but whether the Soviets ever grilled him on that remains to be seen. But they were really skeptical when he went over there. They kind of pegged him for what he was, somebody, and they weren't sad when he left. They were not sad when he came back to the United States.
Something that's always clouded in conspiracy is Jack Ruby. What do you guys think? Is he mafia? Is he, a government, hitman, or is he just a deranged Kennedy supporter that wanted to take matters into his own hands?
I think he was the latter, basically. It's pretty clear from the witness testimony and just what the Warren Commission discovered with Ruby, that he was particularly disturbed by the assassination, and I think, like a lot of Americans, there was sort of this anger that welled up in him, and in his mind, very simple mind, I think he just felt like, hey, I'm gonna shoot the guy who killed the president, and I'm going to be viewed as some sort of national hero, because nobody wants to have to go through a trial and everything that obviously an assassination is going to bring along. I think he felt terrible for Jackie Kennedy and the kids, and he didn't want to have them to have to live through that. And he just kind of figured, I'll take care of business. I've got the opportunity now. I'll just take care of business and get rid of this piece of crap. And ultimately, that's what he did. I just don't think he realized until after the fact that
the conspiracy that he's going to cause.
There you go.
Yeah.
It all of a sudden became fertile breeding ground for conspiracies. And the thing is that there were going to be conspiracies anyway.
Yeah.
Just given the situation with the mafia, the Cubans, the Soviets, everything going on in the world right then. Conspiracies are inevitable. And to this very day, nothing major happens without there being a conspiracy. Whether you're talking September 11th or you're talking Princess Diana's death or what have you, there's always, people just have a hard time accepting the fact that it kind of just is what it is. It's not some underworld organization with the invisible hand kind of orchestrating everything here. But he quickly realized that, as Ruby quickly realized that, boy, maybe that wasn't such a bright idea after all, because it lent itself to fertile ground for conspiracies and the like. And here we are 62 years later still dealing with it. And I imagine we'll always be dealing with conspiracies, because honestly, conspiracies are sexy, Conspiracies are sexy, and people just like those kind of things.
Yeah, people are always asking, like, why is it taking so long to release the Kennedy files? And now that they're starting to release the files, it seems that more conspiracies are really starting to come out of the woodwork. Do you see that, or do you see that these files are starting to answer questions? Are they creating more questions? What are the Kennedy files doing?
My opinion is it's much ado about nothing, much ado about very little. I mean, we know that the FBI was covering their ass to some degree, because Oswald obviously was kind of on their radar screens for for a number of years beforehand. And that stands to reason because the dude defected to the Soviet Union, and then he undefected, and then he tried to redefect, and he's in New Orleans trying to, pass out pamphlets for fair play for Cuba committee, and then he's in Mexico. So I mean, the guy was kind of a loose cannon. So I think, they obviously rightfully were looking into the guy, but they obviously played it a little bit too removed. Obviously, November 22nd, 1963. They should have known that the president's motorcade was going to be directed by the Texas School Book Depository, where just by pure coincidence, Lee Harvey Oswald happened to work, and that therefore that could create a problem for them. But so they dropped the ball, and there was some cover your ass stuff going on. But outside of that, I've seen nothing. I've heard of nothing. I've read nothing in the newer stuff that's come out that has changed my mind in any way whatsoever. That essentially, again, the Warren Commission basically got it right.
Rich, what are your thoughts?
Well, we all know what happened that day in Dallas. And the remarkable part about the whole thing was that the president was assassinated. Officer J.D. Tibbetts was gunned down, and Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in the span of a little more than 2 hours. And for all practical purposes, it was all wrapped up. The president was assassinated. His assassin was apprehended. But after that, things went off the rails. And they went off the rails, first of all, with the Dallas Police Department. And you've talked about this with D.B. Cooper, and we've discussed it, Seth, when we had our D.B. Cooper things, that preservation of evidence is really important. And I watched it on TV the Friday night following the assassination. It was all over the TV. They paraded Lee Harvey Oswald out for the press. Press asked him questions. He said he was a patsy. They were passing the rifle around like it was a loaf of bread. Here's the most important piece of evidence. Could have fingerprints on it from the shooter. And they're passing it. They dragged it out of the school book depository. One guy's carrying it over his shoulder with a sling. And they passed it around. They showed it to the cameras, and I was sitting there, and the police officer that had it said, "This is the weapon. This is a Mauser." And I knew the difference between a Mauser. I was a history buff with World War II weapons, and that no looked more like a Mauser than a mouse looks like a cat. It was obviously a Kakano, and it was small caliber, 6.5, or a Mauser's up. They used to call it an 8mm Mauser, but it was 7.92mm, much larger caliber, high-powered rifle. The Kakano was not a high-powered rifle. In fact, the Italians had a larger caliber rifle that they were manufacturing when that one was manufactured, which was 7.35, and it was a smaller rifle, and that's when things started to fall off the truck. People looking at that and said, "Well, jeepers, this police officer's identifying this rifle, and that isn't what it is." And they later corrected and say, "Well, they're similar." Well, the only thing similar out of them is they were bolt action. They don't look alike. The style is different. The stock is different. And they don't even compare. And as things went along, the Dallas Police Department got very, very parochial about this whole thing. And there were so many police departments involved in this. Texas Highway Patrol, they had them directing traffic. Texas Rangers, which is part of the same organization, but they're an investigator, and they were semi-involved. The FBI, of course, was involved. The Secret Service was involved. None of these groups were sharing information. And here we come onto a Sunday morning, and I'm sitting in front of my television on a Sunday morning, and they're going to be taking Lee Harvey Oswald out of the Dallas police station, and they're going to put him in an armored car for his protection. And a civilian comes out of the crowd with a revolver and on live TV shoots him right in the gut. And how the police department could have ever allowed that. But the fact was that Jack Ruby was familiar to the Dallas Police Department. He was a buddy. And they didn't think it was unusual that he was there. And because they knew him, they didn't say, hey, why are you here? And he literally walked down the ramp into the area, which was like a sally port, where they were going to transfer him from the building to this armored car undercover, not out in the open. And they dropped the ball there. So many investigative agencies involved in this whole thing. And I don't think that helped, that fueled the conspiracy as well, is that there were so many agencies and they weren't sharing information and they didn't give a common picture of what was going and what was happening. And that, I think that's where this whole conspiracy situation started, was with the people that were there and the people who were agencies that were not communicating with each other.
Now, do you think that, because back in that time, police agencies didn't share information, as you highlighted. The FBI didn't share anything with the ATF didn't share anything with CIA didn't share anything with the sheriff's office. Nothing, no information was ever shared. Do you think, had the police departments been able to communicate with each other and the different agencies, do you think Kennedy would still be alive if they were transferring files about Oswald and everybody kind of knew that he worked at that depository and it was well known and it was just planned out better? Do you think that we would still have Kennedy?
Well, I mean, to be sure, there certainly is a world whereby the FBI would have been a little bit more thorough. They would have realized that there is a prospective problem in Lee Harvey Oswald and would have known where he worked, and they would have been, a little more diligent with respect to making sure that the opportunity didn't present itself for something to go awry. But so, yeah, I think it's possible, at least in that respect. I don't know that if communicating, between all these agencies in advance would have really done much. I mean, the anatomy of a conspiracy here really comes down to a number of different things related to, again, what actually transpired. Somebody obviously dropped the ball with respect to Lee Harvey Oswald and just knowing that the guy was there. But then obviously after the fact, as Richard mentioned, the way that this case was investigated, it was 1963. In 2025, we're going to be very different in terms of how we handle these things. And there were some systemic issues as well. For example, assassinating the president actually was not a federal crime at that time. So who had jurisdiction over this whole thing was somewhat of a question as well. Initially, Dallas police were saying, hey, we've got jurisdiction. We're not even going to release the body. But the Secret Service said, "The hell with you. We're taking the president, and basically the federal government, the FBI, is going to take the lead on this." That has since been worked out, with legislation and everything as far as that's concerned. But and then obviously the situation with November 24th, 1963, where Jack Ruby goes ahead and kills Oswald. Well, that doesn't help the matter either. So. There are several things that just happen to come together to just create this situation, starting with arriving in Dallas, and it happened to all of a sudden the rain broke and it was a sunny day and they decided to, not have the top on the limousine. And, it wasn't a bulletproof top, but it's one of those things where you obstruct the view to some degree. And who knows, that may have been all that was required for the shot to miss an inch or two to the right or to the left or whatever, what have you. So,
does the Zapruder film create questions or solve problems? Is it even because the whole magic bullet theory and like how like his head moved and how what was it, Governor
Connolly.
yeah,
Governor
how
Connolly.
he got wounded through the back and into his leg and his hand and stuff like that. How does that whole thing play out? Because it would have had to meant that the bullet would have taken like a completely like right angle turn.
Well, actually, that's incorrect about having a right angle turn. That's part of how it's easy to muddy the waters. To answer your question directly, thank goodness we have the Zapruder film, because that cannot be disputed. There's no way to dispute the timing and what happened and everything related to the assassination. So that, I think, effectively proves that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person involved with this thing there. But it's important for people to understand, the relationship of where Governor Connolly was sitting relative to the president. He was on a jump seat. He wasn't directly in front of the president. He was to the left, kind of shifted more towards the center of the car. That is the jump seat relative to where the president was struck, and also at a different height relative to the president. So when you take a look at the magic bullet, so to speak, and you realize the trajectory that the bullet had to have taken, just a stray shot from the Texas School Book Depository, hits the president and back, comes out of his throat. There's only, if you just continue on in a straight line, it hits the governor, Governor Connolly, exactly where it should have hit the governor in the back as well. And there's an oblong shaped hole, which indicates that the bullet was tumbling, which of course it would be tumbling after it travels through the president's body. And then obviously it kind of ricocheted on some bones, hit his wrist, ended up lodging in a thigh and so forth. So that's the only way the bullet could have traveled. I would argue that indeed a magic bullet would have been one that somehow missed the governor, because when the shot was taken, that first shot was taken and it traveled clean through the president. Of course, this was not the shot that killed the president. This is the first shot where the president raises up his elbows and so forth, because his spine had been hit. And that's a physiological reaction. That's a natural reaction to an injured spine. So the physical evidence is there, but the bullet, what would have been an amazing, what would have been magic, is if somehow it traveled through the president, then made a sharp right hand turn and completely missed the governor. But continuing in a straight line, given the how the governor was lined up in relationship to the president, it had no choice but to hit the governor exactly as it did. So the physical proof, the physical evidence is clearly there. And again, we also have, we have all of this on the Zapruder film that shows exactly what happened. And we also have the governor's testimony as well as to what he recalls hearing and what he recalls happening, which I think is very intriguing and very enlightening, and tells us exactly how the assassination unfolded.
So I'm curious about Hoover and the FBI. Do you feel, because there's a lot of stuff, and I'll start with Rich. Rich, how do you feel about the people saying that Hoover was pressured to basically clean up this whole act, and basically found that like you said, shot, killed, captured, all within 2 hours. I'm curious, like, do you think that he felt pressure from other, parts of the deep state government to avoid a nuclear war and just say that it was only Lee Harvey Oswald?
No, I don't think that he was in on any conspiracy to do that. I think J. Edgar Hoover was trying to cover J. Edgar Hoover's butt, and he always did that. And he'd been around so long that, and this was towards the end of his career, that he was trying to cover the FBI's butt, that they dropped the ball on this. I think he knew that they dropped the ball. And I don't know why they dropped the ball. Maybe they didn't figure that Lee Harvey Oswald was dangerous as far as a possible assassination. They knew he was a loose cannon, and they knew he did strange things, defecting, undefecting, going to Cuba, trying to support Cuba, going to Mexico. All of those things the FBI knew about him. kind of told them that maybe they should keep an eye on this guy, and they didn't. He got away, and I don't even know that they knew that he worked where he worked. And if they had, they could have easily made the motorcade, instead of turning right, what is it, on Houston and then left on, they could have had it just go straight, and it would have avoided the school book depository altogether on its way to where Kennedy was scheduled to speak. They could have avoided that area just by straightening out the route, and it wouldn't have taken
I think
too much to do that.
if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that would have worked, because going straight would have put him on Commerce Street.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there was a barrier between Commerce Street and Elm Street that prevented them from getting on the freeway, basically to go to the hall where the president was going to speak. So I think that they did have to ultimately make the turns they made, but obviously nowadays you can imagine the Secret Service would have been in that building,
Of course.
and therefore the opportunity wouldn't have presented itself. But yeah.
What would Kennedy's career have looked like had this not happened? What do you think would have, like, do you think the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, like how would all of these world events have played out had this not happened? Or do you think it just would have eventually found its way?
Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? And obviously the big question relates to Vietnam, right? And
Exactly.
what Johnson did with Vietnam. And there's a lot of conflicting information out there with respect to what would have happened related to Vietnam, because Kennedy, initially was the one who sent American advisors into Vietnam. And, but there were, wasn't supposed to be anything like what ended up happening here. So if I were to hazard a guess, I don't think Vietnam would have ended up the way Vietnam ended up. President Johnson had a little bit of as he said, I'll be damned if I'm going to be the first president or the whatever to lose a war, basically. And there was this part of him that kind of a machismo part there. And I think he just, that was his inclination. And I think he relied very heavily upon the advice of the generals and so forth. And Kennedy, obviously, after the Bay of Pigs and everything, was much more careful to make sure that just because a general says it doesn't mean that they know what the hell they're talking about, just because that's a general's recommendation. So I suspect Vietnam would not have occurred the way it did if Kennedy had been president. But it's just speculation. Obviously, Kennedy getting assassinated led to Johnson, led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act and all that, which was made a lot easier in the wake of the president's death, and obviously President Johnson spearheading that effort. But it would have been a very, very different world. The 60s would have been very different. Who knows what would have happened with Martin Luther King Jr.? Who knows what would have happened with his brother, Robert Kennedy, both of whom were also assassinated, within a few years of the president. So it's just really, really hard to imagine how different things would be in the United States of America.
Rich?
It's interesting that you brought up those other two assassinations, both Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and the conspiracy theories that go along with both of those. Both of those have conspiracy theories. It seems to be part of our fabric in this country when something traumatic like that happens. There seems to be a conspiracy weave that gains momentum, and maybe that's human nature as it is worldwide, but it seems to gain traction in this country that every time there is a traumatic experience for the country, that a conspiracy develops around it.
It's also worth remembering what happened after the assassinations as well. We not only had Vietnam, and we found out that the government wasn't being honest with us with respect to Vietnam and some of what was taking place there, specifically we were being told, and the president was being told that we're kicking ass and everything else. And then sort of the truth started coming out as, journalists started uncovering what was actually happening in Vietnam, that we were getting our ass handed to us. And basically we're in the middle of a civil war. So you had, the American public being exposed to a government that is lying to them about that. And then shortly thereafter, we have Watergate. So it's like you got bam, bam, bam. You've got these big events, and you've in obviously Watergate and everything that transpired there, and the President Nixon being dishonest about that and everything. And it just, so the amount of damage done to the reputation of the United States of America during that 10, 11 year period of time. And see, Nixon resigned in was it 74? I think August of 74. Mm-hmm. So we're talking, basically 11 years. Boy, it's just enormous. And we're still dealing with it today in the year 2025, all these years later. And I don't know that it'll ever pass on. But having said that, I think it would be interesting to talk about some of the things that I believe effectively prove that it was not a conspiracy. That basically the Warren Commission essentially got it right. So
yeah, go for it.
So
what is driving your theory?
Well, the evidence. That's the first thing to remember. When we're talking Lee Harvey Oswald here, it's very important to remember, firstly, that on April 10th, 1963, he attempted to assassinate General Walker in Dallas. He took a shot at General Walker with the same rifle that he used to kill the president.
That's so crazy.
So General Walker was a rising political figure in Dallas, April of 63. Someone takes a shot at General Walker from a distance and almost hits him in the head. He shoots through a study window and the bullet barely misses his head. Now, the authorities didn't know who had attempted to assassinate General Walker that April. It wasn't only until the president was assassinated that Lee Harvey Oswald's wife said, by the way, Lee is the person who attempted to assassinate General Walker later on. And the Warren Commission looked at that, and sure enough, there was evidence found that indicates that that Lee Harvey Oswald was the person who attempted to assassinate General Walker, and that he used the same rifle, the same ammunition. So here's a guy who attempts to assassinate General Walker in April 1963. Then we've got what happened from the Texas School Book Depository, and the evidence is pretty clear that, Lee Harvey Oswald took 3 shots at the president, two of which hit the president, one of which, of course, was fatal to the president. Then within, 45 minutes, Lee Harvey Oswald shoots and kills Officer J.D. Tippit on the street. And there are witnesses to this. Shoots and kills Officer J.D. Tippit, then flees to the Texas Theater, and he attempts to kill one of the officers in the Texas Theater as they, surround him and attempt to pull him out of the theater. The only reason he wasn't successful is the police officer who got to Oswald first got his finger in between the trigger, and basically he put his finger in the trigger, and Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't pull the trigger back. So, first of all, is that the way an innocent man acts, just killing people left and right and attempting to kill people left and right? No, of course it isn't. So that's very important to remember, to understand who you're dealing with in Lee Harvey Oswald. He wasn't a patsy. This guy was a loose cannon. This guy was a nut. Not to mention defects to the Soviet Union, undefects from the Soviet Union, then tries to redefect. He's trying to go to Cuba. He's running into resistance there because they don't want to have a damn thing to do with this guy. He's in Mexico. The whole thing's a hot mess. And then I think the important evidence really comes down to the Zapruder film. And basically, I'll just tell you, and I won't monopolize the time here because you're good. I want to just get this out here because I think this is really, really important here. The entire assassination is on film. It's on tape. It's on the Zapruder film. And so we know exactly what happened. We know how the timing and everything worked with respect to this. So it's worth noting, firstly, that the witnesses that were in Dealey Plaza on that day, overwhelmingly, the witnesses said that you had 3 shots and that the second and third shot were bunched together. They were closer in relative to each other than the timing between the first and second shot. So what you have is you have at basically the limousine turns from Houston Street onto Elm Street. And just as it sort of straightens up on Elm Street and is traveling very slow, again, about 11 miles an hour, it passes behind a sign. And you see this on the Zapruder film, the limousine passes behind a sign. It's during the time it was behind that sign that the first shot was taken and the president was hit in the back, which ultimately caused him to move his arms up. And that's the quote unquote magic bullet that continued straight and hit the governor and created all the damage there. That was approximately Zapruder frame 215. Then 5.35 seconds later, at Zapruder frame 313, you see the president get hit in the back of the head. The bullet strikes the head, and there's a momentary jostle forward as the bullet hits the president, and then the president kind of jets back to the back and to the left as the exit wound basically creates that explosion in the front right quadrant of the head, the skull, basically. Then it's after that shot, I believe about 3.77 seconds later after that shot, at approximately Zapruder frame 280 or 382, that the third and final shot took and was ultimately missed. Now, why this is important is because when the Warren Commission investigated the assassination, they could never determine. They 2 bullets or parts thereof were recovered, 2 of the 3. The third one was never recovered. So they were not sure which one of the 3 shots missed the president, missed the limousine, missed everything. So the Warren Commission didn't really settle that matter. Now, years later, I think it was 79, was the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and they essentially determined that it was the first shot that Lee Harvey Oswald took that missed. They're also the committee that relied upon acoustic evidence to determine that there was a second shooter, which was later discredited. Later, that acoustic evidence was later discredited. So the House Select Committee on Assassinations that re-looked at the Kennedy assassination, they screwed up big time here. And again, one of the ways they screwed up was somehow trying to determine that it was the first shot that missed. I firmly believe that the evidence shows that it was actually the third shot that missed, and there are a number of pieces of evidence why, not the least of which is the testimony of Governor Connally himself with respect to what actually happened there. But that coupled with the witness testimony, firsthand witnesses that actually saw the assassination took place and heard the assassination take place, I think makes it absolutely crystal clear that there were only 3 shots that took place. All of them came from the Texas School Book Depository. 3 bullet casings shells were recovered there. 2 of the bullets were never recovered. Or I'm sorry, rather, 2 of the bullets were recovered or parts thereof, and there was 1 that was never recovered except traces. I believe there are traces of that bullet that came from a street curb. Because not many people know this. There was actually one other person who was injured during the assassination.
There was?
Yes, there was a guy named James Tague. A guy named James Tague was a car salesman who was standing on Commerce Street, which was like one street further away from the sniper's nest and where the president was. And when the missed shot, I believe, again, the third shot was taken, it completely missed. It ricocheted off of the road. And we have a witness on the overpass, the railroad overpass, who said the shot that hit the president in the head, I could clearly see his head exploded. He said there was a third shot that took place after that. And he says he remembers hearing it take place after that. And more importantly, he saw it, because he said there was a puff of dust that came off of the street, like to the front left of the presidential limousine. So the bullet hit the street, Elm Street, that is. And what happened is the bullet hit the Elm Street and ricocheted and continued in a straight direction and hit a concrete curb on Commerce Street. And when it hit that concrete curb, it chipped the piece of concrete off that hit the James Tague in the cheek and actually caused his cheek to bleed. Now, Mr. Tague did not know that he had been injured or hurt or anything of that nature until after this assassination and everything had taken place. One of the people standing next to him, in fact, it may have been a police officer, said, you have blood on your cheek. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember there was like a sharp pain or a little pain or something at the time this happened. So he was the only other person who was actually impacted by the assassination, and that's basically been proven. In fact, the Warren Commission, the piece of the curb that's chipped, they actually sawed it out of the street and brought it back to D.C. to Quantico, I believe, and actually investigate it. And there were that area that was chipped. They found that there was antimony and lead, traces of antimony and lead on the curb there, which was what the interior of the bullet was made of. Importantly, there was no copper there because these were copper jacketed bullets. The reason there was no copper there was because, remember, it had initially ricocheted off of Elm Street. We have the witness who actually saw the little puff of gravel or something being kicked up, which stripped the bullet of the copper casing, and then the bullet continued on. The interior of the bullet continued on and hit the curb and basically vaporized, but at the same time it vaporized, it chipped off a little piece of the concrete or whatever. So there's actual physical evidence that proves basically what happened as far as that's concerned. But it's absolutely clear to me when you look at the Zapruder film and you consider the timing of what the witnesses said, and when you consider what Governor Connolly said in terms of his recollections, that's what happened, that it was the third shot that missed. And one more thing I'll say very quickly about this. Why is that important? Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? Like which shot missed? It's very, very important because, first of all, we correct an error in our understanding of what actually happened on that day. To understand precisely the timing and what shot missed is important because it's a very historical event. Just for that, and for no other reason than that alone. But the other question, the natural question is, okay, if he took a third shot after he had killed the president, who is he shooting at? Because at Zapruder frame 382, it's 3.77 seconds after the headshot, the kill shot, you've got the president who's shot. He's down. He's laying down. You've got Governor Connolly's been shot. He's laying down because his wife Nellie pulled him over. You've got Governor Connolly's wife Nellie, who's kind of hunched over the governor, and this is all on film. But the one thing you have, the only person you have that could have been a target was Jackie Kennedy herself, who just so happened to be climbing on the back trunk of the car. She doesn't even remember this happening, but she was climbing on the back trunk of the car to retrieve a fragment of the president's brain, skull, on the back trunk of the car. So it just so happens at that exact moment when that third shot was taken, she was in a very high profile position, and indeed was the only target, really only person to shoot at. So I've said this before, that as horrific as this day was, it could have actually been much worse, because it appears that Lee Harvey Oswald was not only attempting to kill the president, but also Jackie Kennedy as well. Obviously, she survived. So that's important from a historical standpoint, understanding exactly what happened. But I also think is very, very important in terms of evidence that indicates there's no way the mafia or the Soviet Union or the Cubans or what have you were involved, because there's no way that they would have been interested in Jackie Kennedy, the first lady, also being killed, especially when you're talking the mafia. I mean, it's just sort of known that families are left out of it. The principals are one thing, they're all fair targets, but the families are left out of it. So that's a very, very, very strong indication in my mind that there is no way that there was anybody else involved other than Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone.
Rich, I'm interested to hear your thoughts
Well,
on that.
I think it's almost inevitable that when something traumatic like this happens, the assassination, that we're going to have a conspiracy. It's just our human nature. And this one, where Kennedy was such an important person in American history, especially after the assassination, he became revered, and an attack on him was attack on us. That was the feeling of everybody back then, that the attack on the president was an attack on the American people, and we felt it, especially in Massachusetts, because Kennedy was from here. And that was our reaction, that one nut couldn't have done all of that, couldn't have made the entire country feel the terrible feelings that we had. And that's how the conspiracy got rolling, that could one person make the entire nation feel it? So that's how that fueled the conspiracy. And then, of course, when Jack Ruby did his deed 2 days after, that only added fuel to the fire, that there's got to be something going on here. And as you said, Eric, maybe there wasn't. Maybe it is what happened, and that's the end of the story. But as a nation, we kind of bought into this, and I think that went back further than before Kennedy. There was conspiracies that went along. I can remember when I was in elementary and high school, there was a newspaper that was in the supermarkets, and you'd go by it, and they were reporting that Hitler was still alive. For 25 or 30 years after World War II, he was seen here, he was seen there.
He was out in Argentina.
He's in Argentina. He's in Uruguay and countries in South America. And we knew that there were Germans who were involved in the Nazi movement that wound up in South America. So why not just assume that Hitler was also there? There's just a general theme of conspiracy that went along with that as well. And it continues to this day. We have conspiracy theories with what happened to all kinds of unsolved mysteries. The D.B. Cooper mystery that you're well aware of, that, and we talked about the Kennedy assassination and the D.B. Cooper affair. Preservation of evidence would have helped so much in both of those cases to sort things out a little bit, and it didn't happen. I think that has taught the world a lesson that evidence is important, and don't touch it. Don't pick it up and say, here's the rifle, and you've got your hands all over it, and you pass that over to somebody else who's sitting to your right, and he's got his hands all over it before anybody looked at it. And nobody took any latent prints off it that I ever heard of that took prints off of that rifle. And maybe Lee Harvey Oswald wore gloves, but maybe he didn't. And but we'll never know.
It's interesting. A couple of things here, a couple of thoughts. I think you're right that people have a hard time believing that a loser, 24-year-old loser in Lee Harvey Oswald could literally fell a president of the United States, somebody of John F. Kennedy's caliber, that this loser can somehow just end it all. Like he possesses the power to somehow literally kill the president of the United States and forever change world history. But the sad reality is that is exactly what can happen, and that is exactly what did happen. It's hard to comprehend. It's hard to believe, but that's exactly what took place. The other thing, to talk about the evidence, preservation of evidence or whatever, we've got more than enough evidence. There is ample evidence that we have that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, and he was the only person who pulled shots that day, pulled the trigger that day. So yeah, it would have been nice that a few other things had gone differently as far as preservation of evidence is concerned. But honestly, conspiracy theorists are conspiracy theorists, and it doesn't matter what you throw out there. There's always an explanation for it. There's always a deep state explanation. It's planted evidence. It's fake, whatever. There's always a convenient answer. So it's important to remember that, I think, to understand that. But again, there is ample evidence there. And one thing we should talk about is Governor Conley, and what he said about this. And I found his testimony very interesting, because Governor Conley always said that he did not believe that he was shot with the same bullet that the president was shot. He didn't believe that the magic bullet theory could be true. He had a hard time believing that Kennedy got shot and that bullet traveled through Kennedy and hurt Conley. So he never believed that, even though he intellectually, I think he understood the science behind it and everything else. What Governor Conley said is this, and for those who are interested, you can look. He was on C-SPAN, I believe in the early 90s. He was on C-SPAN and did an interview talking, kind of explaining what he recalls. And Governor Conley said that he recalls making the turn onto Elm Street and hearing a shot. And he said he immediately recognized it as a rifle shot coming from behind him. And what he says is that he turned to look around, back to his right to look around, the direction the shot was coming from, and he got turned around most of the way, but didn't see the president. Didn't see the president at that point. And then he says, so he started to turn back around counterclockwise, because he was then going to look over his left shoulder. And the governor says, just as he was about facing forward in that turn, facing forward at that point, he says, that's when he got shot. And he says it was like a pop in the back. He said it was so forceful, it actually thrust him forward. It actually pushed him forward. He said that's when he got shot. He kind of lunged forward and he looked down and he saw blood on his hands, or on his pants or something of that nature. Saw blood on him. And he says right at that point, his wife, who was sitting to his left, pulled him down into her lap, and says just as he got down into her lap and she was kind of covering up, he says that's when the third shot took place, which he didn't recall hearing, but he said there was blood splattered all over, and he said that's when the president was killed. He says that's how he remembers it. Well, I went back and I took a look at the Zapruder film frame by frame and analyzed the Zapruder film relative to what the governor recalled. And this is what actually happened. Indeed, the first shot rings out, and that's, again, approximately Zapruder frame 215. And that's when the limousine is behind the sign, or at least the president is behind the sign. The governor is just emerging from behind the sign. And sure enough, you see the governor turning around to the right and looking almost completely behind him. At the same point, the president's, raising his arms up. He's been hit, obviously, in the back, in the spine and everything, and he's holding his arms up. So we know the president has been hit. So indeed, the president was hit. The governor's turning around as he recalls, or what have you. Then, sure enough, on the Zapruder film, you see the Governor Conley starting to move back around the other direction. And just at the point the governor is facing forward, that's during frame 313, when the president is hit in the head and the president's head basically explodes. And the governor is looking forward at this point. Remarkably, sure enough, you actually see the governor get thrust forward at that point. He gets thrust forward. Just as he recalls, he says, I remember getting popped in the back and getting thrust forward and seeing blood and everything. And then sure enough, momentarily after, you see him get pulled to the left. His memory is correct on that, get pulled to the left and is laying down. And then he hears the final shot. Now, in his mind, he's thinking that that final shot is when the president got hit in the head.
Yeah.
He's thinking that he got shot when he gets thrust forward. What the Zapruder film shows actually happened is that the president is shot again at the first time on frame 215, and the governor's turning around. Unbeknownst to the governor, he has also been shot at that point. He doesn't realize that he has also been shot. And this is not uncommon for people. And again, so the governor's turning around, then he turns back around and he's facing forward. And it's when he's facing forward, frame 313, when the president is hit in the head. This is 5.35 seconds later after that first shot. What happens is, if you look very closely, you see the president is shot and his head flinches forward for a moment. Then he kind of kicks back to the left and to the right. What happens is the president, with his leg, kicks the governor's jump seat, because the governor's in front of him in that jump seat, kicks just by natural reaction, kicks the governor's jump seat and kicks him forward. So the governor, thinking he got just shot then and punched by the bullet, that's not what happened. It's actually the president kicking his jump seat and kicking him forward. And it's at that point that the governor leans forward and sees the blood from being shot 5.35 seconds earlier. He doesn't realize it. He thinks he just got shot. He thinks that he just got shot, but that's not what happened at all. It was the president's actually just got his head blown off and he just kicked the governor's chair. Then when the governor's pulled over in the lap and everybody's down, that's when that third shot, he hears the final shot. And that's when I said, that's how we know definitively that it's the third shot that actually missed, because it's clear, factoring in what the governor's recollection was of the timing events, it's clear that that's actually the sequence, actually what happened. But in the governor's mind, he's thinking, he doesn't realize he's been shot, and he's attributing to getting kicked in the back to not the president kicking his jump seat, but to getting the bullet entering his back and everything else. So you can see where the governor, his just remembrance of what happened was just off.
And they didn't know that this was going to happen. This is like just off of something that happened within 5 seconds. Like,
yeah. So
so quick.
You got the first shot that takes place 5.35 seconds later, the second shot, which kills the president, 3.77 seconds later. So this whole thing happens within 9 seconds. Yeah. And again, the Zapruder film is 18.3 frames per second. So the timing is very, very precise. So that is a critical piece of evidence because it's all right there. So I think that effectively proves that it was the third shot that missed. And it also effectively proves that all 3 shots came from the Texas School Book Depository. And it also is consistent with witness testimony, talking about there being more of a gap between the first and second shot than between the second and third shot. They were more closely bunched together. And when you consider, like, for example, the Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who was the agent who heard the first shot and saw the president react and immediately knew there was a problem and started running to the limousine. Clint Hill, who recently passed away, by the way, he only heard 2 shots. He heard the first one and he saw the president respond, and then he heard the second one and saw the president's head get blown off. He doesn't recall hearing anything after that. Well, that makes sense, of course, because you can imagine the trauma. He's a human being. All of a sudden, the president's head explodes. Your mind can imagine it's just rushing with information and absorbing it all. And then that third and final shot that missed, it just didn't even register.
Right.
And you hear the same thing with Jackie Kennedy, who also said first shot hit the president, whatever. The second shot, she didn't recall hearing a third shot. You know, Bill and Gail Newman, who were the famous couple who pulled the kids over covered their kids and were sitting there on the grass as the limousine was, and had a bird's eye view, right? Or not a bird's eye view, but they were right there. Bill Newman simply said, hey, the president, I heard the first shot, the president's right in front of me, he stiffened up. And then I heard a second shot, the president's head blown off. All he heard was 2 shots as well. Again, but he clearly saw what had happened. So you can understand why these witnesses the third shot wouldn't have registered. So it's absolutely clear from the Zapruder film and the evidence, the timing and the witnesses and everything else. And that's just scratching the surface that's exactly what happened. And it was Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone.
I appreciate breaking that down because, like, you know, like we go through a case every week. So I only have about a week plus the knowledge that I had beforehand to really research these cases. And I never heard someone break it down like that. Whenever I was watching something, whether it be like the History Channel or another podcast or whatever, it was always this conspiracy, that. And it was like I was getting flooded with conspiracies while trying to research this. I never heard someone break it down the way that you just did. And I appreciate you doing that. And I watched the Zapruder film, actually out in my truck in the driveway, like 3 or 4 times, just kind of like bringing it back, just to try to like soak up all the info. But of course, that was mixed in with other people saying, "Oh, O'Connell, like he pulled a gun and like shot the president that way when he did that turn thing." And it was, I just want to say thanks for breaking it down like that. That was really interesting.
And it's important to remember that this is forensic evidence. There's forensic evidence, and we have evidence on film. So again, even though some of the evidence was clearly mishandled, we do have more than enough that clearly illustrates precisely what happened, precisely when it happened, you know, where the bullets came from, everything else. So there is absolutely no dispute with respect to who was responsible, where those 3 shots came from. There were actually witnesses directly under Lee Harvey Oswald on the 5th floor depository who heard the shots, heard all 3 shots, and literally heard the bullet casings hitting on the floor that were later recovered. So there is absolutely nothing at all, scientifically, forensically, anything that provides for any other explanation than the one I just provided for, which again, essentially is what the Warren Commission said. Again, very importantly, the Warren Commission never settled the matter of which of the 3 shots missed. They left that as an open-ended question. But I'm saying it was the 3rd shot that missed, and it's absolutely clear that's why. And it appears to suggest that Jackie Kennedy was also a target on November 22nd, 1963.
Before I get into the comments on my posts on social media, Rich, do you have any other open questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to get Eric's opinion on how close do you think that 3rd shot came to hitting anyone?
It's hard to tell. At the point that the 3rd shot was taken, the limousine is obviously at its furthest point away from the sniper's nest.
And accelerating.
It's accelerating, and it's starting to curve to the right. What made the first 2 shots relatively easy is that the limousine was traveling relatively slow, about 11 miles an hour, and it's pulling directly away in front. It's pulling straight ahead of Lee Harvey Oswald. So the target's basically stationary in front of him, getting smaller ever, slowly but surely. But that made it a relatively easy shot. And then obviously after the 2nd shot and the kill shot, the gas is pressed and the car is speeding up, and that's where the turn took place. So that the 3rd shot was harder for a number of reasons. But based upon we know that, or it's pretty clear to me that the shot missed Jackie Kennedy to the left, and that it hit the street and then hit the curb, and then a piece of concrete was chipped off and hit Mr. Tague, who was watching it. So it appears to have been no more than several inches, basically, that it missed Jackie Kennedy to the left, as as Lee Harvey Oswald would have seen it. Yeah,
I've really got only one question here on social media that we haven't covered yet.
sure.
Sort of, but I just wanted to throw it out there. It's from Jay. Is it possible that Lee Harvey Oswald was set up to be the fall guy, but still took one shot while someone else made the fatal shots who was more experienced? Indicating two shooters
Yeah.
from the same area, but Lee only took one shot.
Again, given the forensic evidence, no.
No. Okay.
It's physically impossible. I mean, because we have the physical evidence of 3 cartridges that were actually recovered,
Yeah.
and we have the witnesses that heard, and we can see on tape exactly what happened there. And one of the things that people often talk about is, well, the president's head was thrust back in the kill shot, and therefore the bullet came from the front. That's basically naivety. People don't understand physics. They don't understand the
Right.
physics of it all. The entry wound in the back is always smaller than the exit wound in the front. And because the bullet's traveling at a higher velocity. So as it enters the back of the skull, the bullet is obviously penetrating the back of the skull. So there is a momentary movement of the head forward. But as the bullet travels and then explodes out the front, it's a much bigger hole. It's almost like a rocket engine kind of, it basically thrusts the head back in the opposite direction. So again, as physics explains perfectly well how this works. The other thing I'll say is that I've been to Dealey Plaza many times, and one of the things that I recall hearing before I went there, and I've heard it since then, is that it was a 1 in a million shot. It would be very hard or whatever. The first time I was there, I got a chance to look through the window, the sniper's nest window, and you could see where the limousine would have been. And I was like, holy cow, it's a lot closer than I realized. In your mind, because you hear people talk about how hard the shot was, you think it's like it's a half a mile away shot. I'm like, no, it's just a couple 100 feet away. It's very close. So when you got a rifle with a scope, it's like, how do you miss, to be honest with you, especially for somebody who was an experienced sniper in the military as Lee Harvey Oswald was. So I would argue it was a very easy shot to make.
Wow. So wrapping up with the anniversary of this tragic event, I'll start with Rich. Rich, what lessons can we learn from Kennedy?
Well, there's a lot of lessons. And I guess the first one that I observed when I was 21 years old, as I watched the events unfolding on TV, was that preservation of evidence is certainly important. And we've learned that time and time again. And that it can answer questions. And it wasn't done. And often in the heat of the moment, things like that happen. But we've learned that. And I think in today's day and age, we're looking through a different lens completely as far as evidence preservation. We look at it totally differently now here in 2025 than we did back in 1963 or with D.B. Cooper in 1971. We look at it totally different now. And that's a good thing because we have gained that knowledge that evidence is important, that DNA can really sort things out. And we didn't even have DNA back then. It was there, but we didn't know about it. And that's one of the lessons that has been learned. And we learned a lot of lessons from the Kennedy assassination. We're never going to forget it. I'm never going to forget it. It's in my mind and always will be. But thank you very much, Eric, I enjoy hearing your slant on things that really explained a lot to me, that there's a lot of gaps in my memory that I didn't realize that I had forgotten. That the 3 shots, they were not in the same sequence as far as time goes. And the evidence from the Zapruder film goes to sort that out, that indeed there was time difference between them. And things that got reported with the committee back in the late 70s on assassination, and the open mic on the motorcycle that recorded recorded sounds that may be bouncing around from building to building. But when that was presented, a lot of people accepted that as being true. And even though it was debunked later, in people's minds, it doesn't get debunked. They accept that as always being, well, they recorded those and that's evidence. And we know that that wasn't necessarily true.
Eric, what I'll finish up with that question for you. What can we learn from Kennedy? And follow-up question is, what's going on with you? What are you up to? I know that last time we spoke, you were, knee deep in Gardner. Can't say too much. You did the whole NDA thing. But what's going on? Where can people follow you and all that type of stuff?
First of all, as far as what can be learned from the Kennedy assassination,
Or Kennedy as a politician himself, what
Sure.
lessons can we just pull from this whole thing?
I think the important thing for people to remember is that it's important to be intellectually honest. And just because another version of the story is sexier and more TMZ-ish or what
Yeah.
have you, doesn't mean it's right. So I think I would hope that people would approach these things as events occur, whether it's a September 11th situation or even perhaps President Trump, the attempted assassination several months ago, that they would approach these things forensically and just look at the facts and, let's put the conspiracy stuff aside and let's focus on what we for sure know and what the math and the science and everything shows as far as that's concerned. I just think we're better off and healthier as a country when we focus on truth as opposed to conspiracy. Now, there may be conspiracies, but again, conspiracies will eventually be fleshed out by the math and the science. So that's not to say there's never, complications and conspiracies involved. But again, I would hope that that Americans would again do their damnness to be intellectually honest when it comes to this kind of stuff here. And, I'll just say that, boy, it's sad how things have changed over the years. I mean, back then you could probably speak to a Rich. I mean, a lot of families had the president's portrait in their living room
yes.
or what have
Yeah.
you.
That was a common thing.
That was a common thing, almost like having, Jesus hanging in your
Exactly.
portrait of Jesus.
I can't imagine
I
that
know.
nowadays.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Within the past 20 years, just having like walking into a friend of mine's house and having a portrait right where the clock is right there, of
Yeah.
President Obama or President Biden or President Trump or Bush or any. I can't even fathom that. That's crazy.
I can't either, but boy, it kind of speaks to I guess a simpler time and a time when people really thought highly of the president and the government and a lot.
It was
changed.
Camelot.
Yeah,
That was what we called it. The
Yeah.
Kennedy years in the White House, it was called Camelot.
yeah. As far as what I'm working on now, as you mentioned, I'm focusing a lot of effort on the Gardner Museum heist. There's a lot of stuff taking place there, and I think a lot of progress is being made in
So
that
cool.
investigation, as well as the D.B. Cooper case. I mean, again, there's a new jump zone area that I've identified, Pigeon Springs, Washington, which is where I believe D.B. Cooper ultimately jumped and landed. And this is based upon new firsthand witness testimony that you happened to be there when the
Yeah,
guy
that
first
was
reached out to me.
such timing. Look at that.
Yeah.
That was amazing. That was
So-
great. That was so fun.
So I think that's exciting there. But yeah, I've got a website, ericulis.com, that people can check out. And I mean, I don't really update it regularly, but there's stuff there on some of my investigations. Pardon me there. And I also have a YouTube channel. It's at Eric Ulis Official. And related to the Kennedy stuff, I actually put out a video on my YouTube channel. It's probably been a couple of years ago now. So you'd probably have to dig that deep into the channel. But it's about an hour-long video that actually walks through what I explained earlier in terms of the timing and the Zapruder film and what the governor recalls, would have you. And I go frame by frame on the Zapruder film on there. So it's about an hour long. It's a little lengthy there, but For those who are interested, I encourage you to go to my @Eric Ulis official YouTube channel, or it's and find that video, and you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about. I walk through very clearly what I believe the evidence indicates happened. So that's what I'm up to. But I
Very
want to
cool.
say, first of all, again, it's terrific and wonderful to be here and
It's always so
meet
much fun.
Rich. I
Yeah.
of course met you out in Washington State not too long ago, but it's terrific to be up here in Massachusetts. I live in Rhode Island, of course, so it's a little over an hour drive. But
Yep.
what a nice experience to come up here.
Well, thank you so much for coming up on this rainy Saturday.
Yes, yes.
The 62nd anniversary of the President Kennedy's assassination, which we're delve into today.
So if I can find that Kennedy video, I'll be sure to link it. All of Eric's links are going to be in the description. They might be in the pinned comment, but definitely check the description. They'll all be down there. But Eric, now that you've officially been here and I can meet you, got one of those cool challenge coins for you.
Oh, that's very
Official
cool.
guest of honor.
That's very cool. Well, I appreciate that very much. That's actually really, really.
It's small.
cool.
I know it's like a small little thing, but I
love
think
it.
it's unique, and
I love it.
I believe that they were well made. So
I love it.
There we
It's
go.
Very, very cool. Yeah.
So
Don't be jealous, people. Don't be jealous.
if you want one, you gotta either email me with a really cool theory, whatever it be. All that stuff is down in below. You can check our website out. There's a contact form in there. If you believe that you got something that we can talk about on camera, I'm all ears. Set my email up.
And we'd like to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody next week coming up. And keep those comments coming because that's what keeps this show going.
And Rich, you got a couple books here.
I do. I don't need to be selling my books. Lizzie Borden is still out there, and she's doing very well. Lizzie's been very, very good to me. And if you're interested in Thanksgiving, the book on Governor Bradford, not painted in such a wonderful light as we're talking today, and the parade is getting ready to run off down in Plymouth. Those are available along with my football book, and they're available both on Amazon and on eBay. eBay, if you'd like an inscription.
All of Rich's books are on the website, so you can get the official links, and you'll just travel right through. It brings you right to Amazon and eBay. And with that, if you guys are watching this on Sunday at 7 p.m. tonight, I am going live right here in my living room for a coffee hour. Come by, chat, hang out for, I say an hour, but it usually ends up being an hour 45, 2 hours. And I want to thank Barnabas and Faye for the 2 donations last week. You guys helped keeping the show running and all that type of stuff. And if you're also watching it on Sunday, we got the DB Cooper auction coming to an end. If you're watching it right now in the premiere, it's 9 a.m. But if the DB Cooper Tina Bar Sand is ending today at 3 p.m. So be sure to check it out if you guys want the official Tina Bar money find spot. Eric was there. He can vouch for it.
And there's a book going with that.
Yep, there's a book. One of Rich's books is going with it, the Lizzie Borden Tina Bar special, and it's coming with a show challenge coin. So if you guys want a challenge coin but don't have something, you can get it on the official eBay account. All the links will be in the description. Be sure to check them out. Send us our comments and all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.